This story in John's Gospel is another one of those mysterious post-resurrection appearances of Jesus to his disciples. But I think it's more of a resurrection story about Peter than it is about Jesus. And if Peter can be resurrected, then we can too. Someone explained to me once the difference between resuscitation and resurrection. Resuscitation means giving life back to the person in their old mortal body in which they died. Resurrection means the old life or body has become completely gone and a new life or body form has come. Resuscitation means restoring life to the way it was. It's a second chance at the life you had. Resurrection is the chance to live a whole new life. Resuscitation is a second chance at the choices you've made. Resurrection is about changing the choices themselves. Some scholars call today's passage the rehabilitation of Peter, and others argue that it's the commissioning of Peter, and I say, why can't it be both? If you combine the two, rehabilitation and commissioning, I think you get resurrection. When we feel in the depths of our bones that we are forgiven and loved by God, we are able then to let go of those things that seem like dead weight to us. Past choices and relationships and ways of thinking that no longer serve us, or even worse, that weigh us down. And when that weight is lifted by accepting forgiveness, we're then ready for whatever is new, whatever is next, the new adventure, the new calling, the new way of being in the world, the way that will keep us from falling into those old habits and patterns again. Peter experiences all of this in today's passage. It's quite a long passage, and we are going to walk through this text kind of more in a Bible study style than in a sermon style, if you will. But in order to understand today's text, we have to go back 3 chapters to another story in John's Gospel. Peter is central to both of these stories, but it is the symbol of the charcoal fire that connects these 2 passages. So to begin, let's go back to John 18. After Jesus was arrested by the temple police in the Garden of Gethsemane, Peter and an unnamed disciple, presumably John, followed Jesus as he was taken into the night for questioning to Annas' house. Annas was the father-in-law of the high priest Caiaphas. Now, because the disciple John already knew Caiaphas, they had a relationship, John was allowed into the house, but Peter was left outside the gate, standing by himself. But once John got in, he convinced the women right inside the gate to let Peter in too. As they led him in, one of the women said to Peter, "You're not also one of the man's disciples, are you?" And Peter said, "I'm not." It was cold that night. So as John went on into the house, Peter joined some of the priest's slaves and policemen who were warming themselves around a charcoal fire. Peter around a charcoal fire. This is the context for an event that Jesus predicted in all 4 Gospels. Jesus had just shared a meal with his disciples. He had just washed their feet in an act of humble service. He had predicted that Judas would betray him, and he had given his disciples a new commandment that they love one another. And as Jesus was leaving, Peter said to him, "Lord, I will lay down my life for you." Jesus answered, "Will you lay down your life for me?" Very truly I tell you, before the cock crows, you will have denied me 3 times. Indeed, during that middle of the night to early morning watch, about 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., the watch when the cock crows, Peter denied Jesus 3 times. You know the story. The people around the fire with Peter in the courtyard asked him, "You're not also one of the disciples, are you?" He denied it a second time and said, "No." One of the slaves of the high priest asked, "But did I not see you in the garden with him?" A third time, Peter denied it, and at that moment, the cock crowed. The text tells us that Peter left the courtyard weeping bitterly. This event, this moment, had immediate and a lingering effect on him. In fact, it seems that Peter kind of resigned himself away from discipleship, almost like he excommunicated himself from his comrades and from following Christ. Because in Mark's gospel, when the women come to the empty tomb and they meet this man in white, the man says to them, "Go tell his disciples and Peter that he's going ahead of them to Galilee." Minister Bert Gary says that this indicates that Peter had kind of quit. I mean, if Peter still considered himself a disciple, there would have been no reason to mention him separately. Probably in Peter's mind, no one who denies someone 3 times could consider himself to still be a disciple of that man. We're always harder on ourselves, aren't we, than others are on us. And so Peter left the charcoal fire that night a broken man, having denied his Lord and in his own head and heart feeling like he could no longer be called a disciple. And he was isolated in his pain and grief. Somehow, though, the news of Jesus' resurrection caused Peter, against all odds, to reunite with his friends, with his disciples. And we know that he was hanging out with them because you remember he had that foot race with John to the empty tomb. And then last week we saw that, Jesus entered into the room with the locked doors and the disciples were there. And Peter was there. He was with them. So what brought him back to his friends? Well, we don't really know, but we do know from Luke's gospel that Jesus had one of his post-resurrection appearances just with Peter. We don't know a lot about what happened in that encounter, but it must have made Peter feel special, or at least like Jesus hadn't written him off. The Apostle Paul confirms this private appearance to Peter in 1 Corinthians when he writes, "Jesus was raised on the 3rd day, and he appeared to Peter, then to the 12." In any case, the result of Jesus appearing to Peter and talking to him is that Peter went back to his friends and shared with them the good news of the resurrection. But although Peter saw the risen Lord alone and then 2 more times with the others, what John 21 tells us is that Peter decided to return to the Sea of Tiberias, the Sea of Galilee, anyway, meaning he went back home. He left Jerusalem. He went back to his old job as a fisherman. In today's text, Peter, you'll notice, is the one who says, "I am going fishing," and the rest follow. It's like he's back to his BC life before Christ. He's the first to kind of give up on discipleship. And again, the time of day here is significant. Fishermen would have gone out to sea between 3 a.m. or 4 a.m., and fished until daybreak, a little past 6 a.m. The time frame of this fishing trip and encounter with Jesus on the shore is the exact same time frame when Peter was by the charcoal fire in the courtyard when he denied Jesus. So they're out there fishing, and we hear that they catch nothing. The empty nets may have been a divine message of sorts. Going back to fish for fish is not going to work, Peter. Do you remember Jesus' first call to Peter? It wasn't to keep fishing for fish. He said, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." But Peter had returned to his old ways, fishing for fish, and his friends had gone with him, and they had caught nothing. And then a man appears on the shoreline at sunrise, and this man asks the question that no fisherman wants to be asked after an unsuccessful fishing trip. "Hey, did you catch anything?" "No," they sighed. The guy says, "Well, put your nets on the right side of the boat, and you will." I learned from our Holy Land instructor, Jim Fleming, that it's not unusual for fishermen to listen to a man on the shore and follow his advice, whether they knew that man or not. Because people on the shore had a different vantage point. They could see the water and the colors of the water in different ways, and maybe schools of fish. And so they did listen to this man, even though they didn't know who he was. And all of a sudden, they started hauling in tons of fish. And that's when they have that light bulb moment. And they probably immediately go back to that time when Jesus was in the boat with Peter again, and Jesus was teaching some people on the shore, and he turned to Peter in the middle of the day, which is the wrong time to fish, and he said, "Put down your nets in deep waters," which, by the way, were the wrong kind of waters at the wrong kind of day to fish in the Sea of Galilee. But Peter obeyed and caught so many fish that the nets broke. And so here we are again with Peter and Jesus and lots of fish. And at this point, John, the disciple whom Jesus loved, recognizes that this is the Lord. And the minute he says it out loud, Peter throws on some clothes, jumps in the water, and swims to shore to see Jesus. And this is important because it shows that no matter what shame or guilt Peter was feeling about his threefold denial, he still had a passion for Jesus. He had enough gumption and desire still to jump in those waters and swim to them. He had not completely given up. He still had hope. But what did he see and smell when he reached the shore? He saw the flickering flames of a fire, and he smelled smoke coming from a charcoal fire. Same time of day as when he denied Jesus, same symbol present, the charcoal fire, just a different setting. We've moved from a courtyard to a beach. In John's gospel, the word for charcoal fire is anthrakia. And there are only 2 mentions of a charcoal fire, not just in John's gospel, but in the entire Bible. And both of them are associated with Peter. This isn't coincidence. Fire is representative, of course, of purifying and cleansing and refining, of burning something dead so something new can come to life. Well, once they reach shore, Jesus invites all of the disciples to breakfast. And of course, this is to remind us of the meal, the Last Supper, when Jesus predicted that Peter would deny him. And after both meals, something happens 3 times. After the Last Supper, Peter denies Jesus 3 times. And after the breakfast on the beach, Jesus asks Peter 3 times if he loved him. And Jesus commissions Peter 3 times to a whole new life. This event is called by some a threefold grace for a threefold denial. The first 2 times that Jesus asked Peter if he loved him, the word that is used is the Greek word agape, meaning that unconditional love, the love with which God loves. But when Peter replies back to the Lord, he affirms that he loves Jesus, but he doesn't use the agape word. He uses the other Greek word, phileo, meaning that brotherly kind of love. And so when Jesus asks Peter a third time, "Do you love me?" he accommodates to Peter and uses phileo instead of agape, so that Peter could answer on terms that matched Jesus. Jesus meets Peter where he is, not where he is not. And yet, despite that, the text says that Peter was grieved when Jesus asked him a third time if he loved him. Why was he grieving? Well, it seems that in Peter's heart and mind, the third question probably reminded him of the threefold denial. The smell of the charcoal fire brought him back to that cold night in the courtyard and to the sound of the cock crowing. Allowing yourself to feel this kind of grief, to really feel it deeply, is what allows us to work through it and ultimately heal from it. You notice that Jesus does not ask Peter to ignore or forget what happened in the courtyard that night. Jesus certainly didn't forget about it. Rather, Jesus gave Peter more than just an opportunity to redeem himself. He gave him an opportunity to redefine himself and reinvent himself. It wasn't about going back and redoing the denial this time, but doing it right, not saying that he didn't know him. This is not some elementary school lesson about telling the truth. Because not only does Jesus give Peter the chance to say that he loves him 3 times, he also gives him a new calling, a new vocation 3 times over. He says, "Feed my sheep." Peter was a fisherman. He didn't feed sheep. Fishermen were fairly wealthy those days. That was a good career to have, to be a fisherman. But Jesus was calling him now to a more humble job, that of a shepherd. It paid much less, and it was far less esteemed in society. That said, fishing is a very localized job, right? You have to be on the water to do it. But if you're a shepherd, you're mobile. You go anywhere. You go where the sheep are. You no longer seek the fish of the sea, but the sheep of the flock. This was a new call, a new commission, a new way of being for Peter that would take him far beyond his hometown. In fact, as tradition tells it, it would lead him to become the rock upon which the Church of Christ was built. Jesus had been the great shepherd, right? And now he's handing off this great task of shepherding to Peter. Do you see what a beautiful story of reconciliation and redemption and even resurrection that this is? Jesus not only gave Peter a chance at forgiveness and restoration, he gave him a new purpose so that he really was living a new life, one that couldn't remind him of his old life, one that would allow him to redefine himself as a faithful follower of Jesus, rather than as always remembering he was that disciple that denied him. It would have been so easy for Jesus just to have told Peter, "I forgive you," patted him on the back and sent him on his way back out to sea. But he didn't. He gave Peter a new role and responsibility. He gave Peter more responsibility, not less. In fact, he gave him his very own job. He passed the torch, so to speak, to Peter. Jesus doesn't punish Peter. He actually responds to Peter with more privileges, more responsibility, more confidence, more hope. And as the very last verses in the passage indicate, this is not going to be an easy life. There will be suffering, but it will be a good life, a meaning-filled life, a life with purpose and clarity and hope. We are all at different points in our lives here. I don't know what you were thinking when you walked in the sanctuary this morning or what you're thinking now. I don't know if the sparkle in your eye is from a tear of grief or a tear of joy from laughing so hard with friends. I don't know if your eyes are closed right now because you're deeply contemplating what I'm saying or if it's because you're asleep. I don't know if something wonderful is unfolding in your life or if it feels like your life is folding in on itself. But I do know that we all have moments in our lives like Peter, where we say things we wished we hadn't said or we did things we wished we hadn't done. And the tendency is for us to think about these things over and over again, to even use them as excuses as to why we're not worthy enough to receive blessing or why we're not worthy enough for God's love. Did you know we have hundreds of millions of moments in our lives? And yet we let the 3 moments of denial and the sound of the cock crowing hold us back, hold us hostage even. We let those moments define our lives. And if we do, when we do, we perpetually keep them alive. And they all of a sudden become this foundation for the rest of our story. Why do we do this? Because the reality is, the good news is, nothing that Jesus ever said or did points to God wanting us to live with regret or guilt, fear or shame. In fact, Jesus wants us to define our lives by the moments when we did something right, when we loved that person well, when we forgave that friend who betrayed us, when we made a choice that served others rather than our ego, when we chose faith instead of fear, when we had courage to take a risk and show compassion to someone who needed it. The scene at the end of John's gospel, this breakfast on the beach, is an invitation to us all. God's invitation to us never ends, and neither does God's grace. God wants us to remember the good times on the beach in Galilee, not the bad times near the Garden of Gethsemane. I want you to close your eyes for a minute. Even if it makes you uncomfortable, it will be okay. I want you to imagine that you're out with your family or friends, doing what you've always done in your life, what you do every day, and this scene is taking place on a boat in water. So you're out on the sea, and if you need to be in your office building or school or home, it's okay. It can be a big boat. Just place that place on the boat. Imagine it being a day where nothing really spectacular is happening, and in fact, it seems like you're failing at whatever it is you're trying to do. You're frustrated, about to give up. Nothing is going as planned, and plan B and plan C didn't work either. But then imagine hearing a voice calling out to you, suggesting a new direction or a new way of doing things in your life. And you listen. You try whatever it is that the voice is telling you, and it works. And so you look again to see if you can make out whose voice that is. And you see Jesus standing on the shoreline, or God, or the Spirit, or an emanating light, or serene peacefulness, or an open hand. However you picture the living Christ, imagine the shape and form of that invitation on the shore. And instead of standing back skeptically trying to make out the form of this invitation, imagine taking a leap of faith and jumping in the waters and swimming to shore to say yes to the invitation. You walk up onto shore and you share a meal with this presence, this incarnate love. And it's your favorite meal. And you didn't have to cook it, and you don't have to do the dishes. You just get to enjoy it. Imagine feeling full, well-fed, and this presence of God this divine love in the form of Jesus asks you, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And you say yes 3 times. Even if you want to say no, you say yes. You let your best self respond. You set aside your typical skepticism or negativity or doubt or whatever it is that whispers to you that this is too good to be true, and you respond, yes, I love you. These words on your lips may surprise you, but you say them anyway. Even if it's out of character for you to say such a thing out loud, you say it, even if you don't know why. Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. The presence before you is radiating because of this shared love. And you feel the warmth and security and hope that is ahead. As you are being seen for who you really are, and as you are enjoying that feeling of being known for who you really are, something else is said. Okay, now feed my sheep. Except it might not be feeding, and it might not be sheep, but it's something. What is it? What is the new call? What are you being asked to do? Where are you being asked to go? Into what new life are you being resurrected? Amen.